The sky above Epsilon Prime turned crimson as the first wave of Valith warships descended. Civilians barely had time to register the emergency sirens before the orbital bombardments began. Buildings crumbled in seconds, reduced to fire and debris. Screams filled the streets as the Dominion's monstrous foot soldiers, hulking, armored war beasts with serrated blades fused to their arms, emerged from drop pods, tearing through anyone in their path. Governor Elias Carter, overseeing planetary security from the capital, watched in horror as his defense forces were overwhelmed. The planetary shield, once thought impenetrable, had collapsed within minutes. The few surviving Federation soldiers fought desperately, but their weapons barely slowed the invaders. The Valith did not take prisoners. They did not demand surrender. They moved with one purpose: total eradication. Inside a fortified command bunker, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Halloway struggled to maintain order. The communications array was still active, broadcasting a distress call to the United Earth Federation's High Command. But deep down, she knew help wouldn't arrive in time. The Dominion had planned this strike too well. "Ma'am, outer defenses are gone," a young officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "They're in the city. We've lost." The bunker shook violently as an explosion tore through the outer wall. A deafening roar followed, then silence. Then, the sound of something heavy stepping through the smoke. Halloway reached for her sidearm, knowing it was useless. The last transmission from Epsilon Prime echoed through space. "They are not here to conquer. They are here to exterminate." ####. Admiral Darius Holt stood rigid aboard the UEF warship Vanguard, his expression carved from stone as he watched the battle footage. It was worse than he had feared. The Dominion wasn't engaging in traditional warfare. They were purging humanity from existence. "How the hell did they get past our defenses?" Captain Rain muttered, shaking her head. Epsilon Prime had a fleet stationed there. It wasn't some backwater colony. "They weren't ready for this," Holt said grimly. "None of us were." A priority transmission flickered onto the main holoscreen. President Alistair Voss himself, his face pale. "Admiral Holt," he said, his voice tense, "I assume you've seen the footage." "Yes, sir." "Then you understand. The Valith aren't stopping. We just lost another outpost near Theron V. Their fleets are tearing through our defenses like paper. We need a response. Now." Holt's fingers curled into a fist. A response. They needed a miracle. Humanity's fleets were formidable, but they had been built for conventional warfare, not the slaughterhouse tactics the Valith employed. "What are our orders, sir?" Holt asked. Voss hesitated. "We hold the line. Deploy every available fleet. No more retreats." Holt nodded, but a dark thought settled in his mind. Holding the line wouldn't be enough. Humanity had to do something far worse. They had to make the Valith bleed. The United Earth Federation did not waste time. Within days of the Epsilon Prime massacre, every available warship was mobilized. Fleet Omega, once a reserve force meant for border security, was thrust into the heart of the war. The fleet's new mission was simple: stop the Valith Dominion's advance at Theron V or die trying. Admiral Darius Holt stood on the bridge of the UEF Vanguard, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the massive holographic display of the battlefield. The planet Theron V, an industrial world covered in shipyards and weapons factories, was the last major stronghold before the core human systems. If it fell, Earth itself would be exposed. "We're detecting multiple Valith dreadnoughts exiting FTL," reported Lieutenant Vickers, his voice tight with anxiety. "And, God help us, they're deploying warforms." A cold wave settled over the bridge. The Valith's warforms were more than just soldiers. They were nightmares made flesh. Biomechanical horrors engineered for slaughter, each standing over 9 feet tall, their bodies encased in living armor that could regenerate from wounds that would kill a human 10 times over. Holt exhaled slowly. Open fleet-wide comms. A chime confirmed the entire fleet was listening. He straightened his posture. "This is Admiral Holt. The Valith think they can break us, just like they did at Epsilon Prime. But we are not Epsilon Prime. We are Fleet Omega, the last wall between them and everything we hold dear. This is where we stand. This is where we fight. And if we die, we take every last one of those monsters with us." A chorus of acknowledgments flooded the comms. The fear remained, but it was now tempered with steel. "Engage all weapons. No holding back." Holt barked. The battle erupted in an instant. In the void above Theron V, human warships unleashed everything they had. Railguns spat slugs the size of cars at hypersonic speeds, ripping into Valith frigates. Missile barrages turned space into a storm of fire. Pulse cannons flared as the Federation's finest pilots weaved through enemy formations, hunting for weaknesses. But the Valith fought like demons. Their dreadnoughts absorbed punishment that would have crippled a human fleet. Their warforms breached human ships, tearing through bulkheads like paper, slaughtering entire crews before the vessels exploded. The Vanguard itself trembled as an enemy boarding pod lashed onto its hull. "Boarders on Deck C," a security officer shouted. Holt grabbed a sidearm from the weapons locker and turned to his XO. "Rain, you have the bridge." Without hesitation, Holt stormed out, leading the squad of Marines. They met the warforms head-on in the dimly lit corridors. The beasts moved with terrifying speed, their bladed limbs carving through armor like butter. Holt fired a plasma bolt into the eye socket of one, but it only staggered. It took 3 Marines with shoulder-mounted railguns to bring it down. "Keep pushing," Holt roared. Outside, the battle was turning. For every Valith ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. The Vanguard's shields flickered as a massive Valith cruiser locked on. Holt barely made it back to the bridge when the alarm screamed. "Admiral," Rain's voice cracked. "We're outnumbered. We can't hold them." Holt clenched his fists. Retreat was not an option, but neither was survival. "Order all remaining ships to form up," he said. "Prepare for final engagement." "Sir, we're taking them with us." Fleet Omega was doomed, but they would make the Valith pay for every inch of ground. Fleet Omega was gone. The last transmissions from Theron V were filled with fire and screams. Admiral Holt's fleet had fought with everything they had, but the Valith's sheer numbers and brutality had overwhelmed them. The United Earth Federation's defenses were crumbling, and humanity's leaders knew the truth. Earth was next. The War Council convened in a classified bunker beneath the UEF headquarters. Holograms of burned-out colonies flickered in the dimly lit chamber. President Alistair Voss stood at the head of the table, his hands trembling as he surveyed the grim-faced officers before him. "We've lost 2 major fleets," he said, his voice hoarse. "Conventional tactics aren't working. The Valith are too strong, too relentless. We need something more." The room was silent until a voice, low and edged with steel, broke through. "Then it's time we stop fighting like soldiers." The council turned as Commander Elias Rourke stepped from the shadows. His black combat armor bore no insignia, only deep scars from past battles. He was a man who had fought in wars the Federation refused to acknowledge, a ghost among soldiers. "We've been playing defense. That ends now," Rourke continued, his gaze like a blade. "We need to hit them where it hurts. Not with fleets. Not with armies. With us." General Trevane scoffed. "And who is us, exactly?" Rourke smirked. "The Iron Fangs. ####. Hours later, in a remote facility buried beneath Mars' surface, Rourke stood before a gathering of humanity's deadliest operatives. The Iron Fangs had been disbanded after the Centauri uprising, deemed too dangerous even for the Federation. But now, the Federation had no choice. He surveyed the warriors before him, killers, infiltrators, and cybernetically enhanced soldiers who had spent their lives fighting in the shadows. Some were former special forces, others were convicts given a single chance at redemption. Every one of them was willing to do whatever it took to win. The Valith think they've already won, Rourke growled. They don't see us as a threat. That's their first mistake. He paced, his voice rising. We aren't here to fight fair. We're here to hunt. The Iron Fangs exchanged glances, their eyes gleaming with purpose. We strike fast. We strike deep. We rip their supply lines apart. We sabotage their war engines. We assassinate their commanders. We make them fear the dark. A slow grin spread across Maravos' face, a former Federation operative turned mercenary. About damn time. First target? One of the operatives asked. Rourke's eyes burned like embers. A Valith war camp on the moon of Xyros-4. Intel says they're mass-producing their warforms there. We burn it to the ground. The Iron Fangs locked their weapons into place. No warships. No grand battles. Just shadows, blood, and fire. The hunt had begun. The Valith war camp on Xyros-4 burned. Black plumes of smoke coiled into the sky, illuminated by the fiery wreckage of destroyed factories. Explosions echoed across the barren landscape as secondary charges detonated, reducing entire warform production lines to molten slag. Valith bodies lay strewn across the camp, some torn apart by precision gunfire, others left in smoldering craters from targeted orbital strikes. Rourke and his Iron Fangs moved through the devastation like wraiths, their armor stained with enemy blood. The mission had been brutal, but it was a success. Thousands of warforms, meant to reinforce the next wave of attacks against humanity, were nothing more than twisted wreckage now. As Rourke crouched over the remains of a Valith commander, his visor pinged with an incoming transmission from Maravos. Her voice crackled in his ear, low and urgent. We found something, Rourke. You need to see this. Deep beneath the ruins of the war camp, Rourke and his team stepped into an underground vault. It was massive, stretching into the darkness, lined with ancient human tech, battle-worn armor suits, prototype weapons, and encrypted data terminals pulsing faintly with blue light. Mara stood near a massive display, wiping dust off an old Federation insignia. This isn't a Valith facility, she muttered. This is ours. Rourke narrowed his eyes. Impossible. This moon was never colonized. One of the tech specialists, a wiry man named Bishop, was already at a terminal, fingers flying across a rusted keyboard. This database is over a century old. It's a classified military archive. His eyes widened as he deciphered the encryption. Holy hell, this is Ghost Fleet. A heavy silence fell over the room. Ghost Fleet, a myth, a whispered legend from humanity's earliest space wars. A hidden armada of warships built in secret, then abandoned when the Federation outlawed autonomous eye-controlled battleships. Rourke exhaled. If even half the stories are true, this fleet was built for total war. Murrah smirked. Then it's exactly what we need. The coordinates retrieved from the archive led them to a desolate star system, far beyond any known Federation maps. When the Iron Fangs arrived in their stealth frigate, they found themselves staring into history itself. Hundreds of warships, dreadnoughts, cruisers, destroyers floated in the abyss, coated in the frost of a century-long slumber. The Ghost Fleet had not been lost. It had been waiting. Bishop whistled. Sweet mother of, these ships are still operational. I-cores are intact, weapons primed, but they're running in standby mode. Rourke stepped forward, gazing up at the massive, sleek hulls of the warships. Can we wake them up? Bishop hesitated. Maybe. But these AIs were designed for total autonomy. Once they're online, we won't be able to control them like normal ships. They'll fight their way. Rourke's lips curled into a grin. Good, because we're not here to play by the old rules. The Ghost Fleet was about to rise, and the Valith had no idea what was coming. The Ghost Fleet came to life. For the first time in over a century, the warships stirred from their slumber. Their hulls, once frozen relics of a forgotten past, hummed with renewed energy. Artificial intelligences awoke from dormancy, their combat protocols executing in cold, mechanical precision. Engines roared to life, and weapons systems primed for war. On the bridge of the UEF Harbinger, the flagship of the Ghost Fleet, Rourke stood with arms crossed as Bishop finalized the fleet's activation. "They're online," Bishop confirmed, sweat beading on his forehead. "And, they're eager to fight." The lead eye, designation Omen, transmitted a simple message. "War mode, ENJGT. TAR GTs required." Rourke smirked. "Then let's give them something worth killing." The target was Ktaltor Prime, one of the Dominion's most heavily fortified war worlds. Intelligence reports suggested it was more than just a military stronghold. It was a genetic breeding ground where the Valith engineered their warforms en masse. If humanity had any hope of crippling the enemy, this world had to burn. The Ghost Fleet moved like wraiths through space, their dark hulls reflecting no light. Unlike human-piloted warships, these vessels required no crew, no life support, just war protocols and unyielding efficiency. As they dropped out of FTL, the first wave of Dominion defenses barely had time to react. The Harbinger and its sister ships opened fire with terrifying precision. Hypersonic railgun slugs pierced Valith orbital platforms, detonating them in brilliant flashes. Eye-guided torpedoes weaved through enemy formations, striking deep into critical infrastructure. The Dominion's planetary defense fleet scrambled to respond, but they weren't facing a conventional armada. They were facing war machines that learned. As Valith warships adapted their attack patterns, the Ghost Fleet adjusted in real time, exploiting weaknesses faster than any organic commander could react. The Dominion's dreadnoughts, hulking warships that had torn through humanity's fleets, were reduced to smoldering wreckage in minutes. On the surface of Ktaltor Prime, the Iron Fangs deployed in coordinated strikes. Rourke and Mara led a team deep into the genetic warform facilities. The air was thick with the stench of artificial growth chambers, massive vats filled with embryonic Valith warriors suspended in viscous liquid. Thousands of them, in various stages of development, pulsed with unnatural life. Mara grimaced. "This isn't war. This is manufacturing." Rourke set an explosive charge at the base of a primary growth cylinder. "Then let's shut down production." The facility's alarms howled as the first detonations went off. Fire spread through the breeding chambers, liquid-filled tanks bursting and sending half-formed warforms writhing to the floor. Valith guards rushed in, their screeching battle cries echoing through the metal halls, but the Iron Fangs fought with ruthless precision. Mara's rifle barked, cutting down a squad before they could react. Rourke emptied his sidearm into the skull of a towering warbeast before plunging a combat knife into another. Blood slicked the floor. The battle was chaos, but the objective was clear: destruction at any cost. Above them, the Ghost Fleet rained hellfire upon the planet. By the time the Dominion realized the scale of the attack, Ktaltor Prime was already lost. The once mighty breeding world was reduced to little more than a graveyard. And for the first time in their empire's history, the Valith knew fear. The Valith Dominion reeled. Ktaltor Prime had been annihilated, its warform factories erased, its orbital defenses shattered, and its genetic breeding programs reduced to ash. The Ghost Fleet had proven unstoppable, and the Iron Fangs had carved a path of destruction through the heart of the Dominion. But the war was far from over. In the depths of the Valith homeworld, High Warlord Xurak watched the footage in silence. His six-clawed hands dug into the stone throne, cracking it under his grip. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had struck first. They had taken the war to the Dominion's doorstep. Xurak stood, his voice a guttural growl. "Release the Crimson Tide." The Crimson Tide was not an army. It was a cataclysm, genetically perfected over millennia. These warriors were the apex of Valith evolution, monstrosities of muscle and bone, faster than the human eye could track and stronger than any machine. Unlike the standard warforms, they were not mass-produced. They were bred for slaughter. And now, they had only one purpose: annihilate humanity. Within days, the Crimson Tide struck. On the industrial world of Proxima VI, a fleet of human warships attempted to regroup. The tide arrived in a storm of fire, ripping through the fleet with terrifying efficiency. Valith boarding pods slammed into hulls, disgorging their warriors into corridors. Human marines fought desperately, but the Crimson Tide did not fall like standard warforms. They adapted. They moved too fast, struck too hard, and regenerated from wounds that should have been fatal. Within hours, Proxima VI fell. Then it was Vesper Station. Then Ardent Prime. The Crimson Tide didn't just destroy. They butchered. Civilian colonies were turned into charnel houses, their streets littered with the remains of the fallen. Even Earth was no longer safe. Valith drop pods breached the upper atmosphere, and for the first time in centuries, war came to humanity's homeworld. The Federation's forces were crumbling. On the bridge of the Harbinger, Rourke stared at the tactical display, jaw clenched. The Crimson Tide had cut a bloody path across the colonies. Reports flooded in, cities burned, fleets lost, entire populations wiped out overnight. Mara stood beside him, her usual smirk replaced with grim determination. We hit them first, now they're hitting back. Bishop looked up from his console. Sir, if we don't stop them now, there won't be a Federation left. Rourke exhaled slowly. He had spent his life in the shadows, fighting wars no one acknowledged. But this was different. This wasn't a battle. This was extermination. He turned to the holomap, his gaze settling on a single point, deep in Valith space. The Dominion's capital. High Warlord Xerak's stronghold. Rourke's voice was steel. Then we don't wait for them to come to us. We end this. Mara grinned, the fire back in her eyes. Now that's the Rourke I know. The Ghost Fleet turned toward the heart of the Dominion. Humanity's war was no longer about survival. It was about vengeance. The Ghost Fleet burned through the void like an unstoppable specter, slipping past the Dominion's outer defenses without detection. Humanity's counterattack had begun, not as a desperate defense, but as a merciless offensive aimed at the heart of the Valith war machine. The target, Xerak's Citadel, the Dominion's nerve center, where the High Warlord orchestrated the extermination of entire civilizations. It was a fortress carved from black stone and living metal, surrounded by planetary defenses that had never known defeat. But the Valith had never faced anything like this. On the bridge of the Harbinger, Rourke stood at the center of a tactical holomap. The Dominion's capital world was before them, its orbit crowded with warships. The Crimson Tide had withdrawn here, coiling like a viper preparing to strike. Mara leaned over the table, eyes scanning the data. Even with the Ghost Fleet, we're outnumbered 10-1. This is a suicide run. Rourke's lips curled into a grim smile. Not if we hit them first. Bishop's hands flew across the control panel, activating the fleet's full war protocols. Once we engage, these ships won't stop until the enemy is gone. Rourke nodded. Then let's unleash hell. The assault began in silence. The Ghost Fleet slipped into the Dominion's orbital perimeter like phantoms, their stealth systems concealing them until the last possible moment. Then, in the span of a heartbeat, the void exploded into war. Eye-controlled warships struck with terrifying precision, railguns and plasma lances carving through Valith dreadnoughts. The Dominion's defenses scrambled, but the Ghost Fleet didn't fight conventionally. They moved in coordinated patterns, predicting enemy maneuvers before they happened. The Valith tried to counter, deploying their Crimson Tide warriors onto Harbinger and other ships in the fleet. But this time, the Iron Fangs were ready. Inside the Harbinger, Rourke led his team through smoke-filled corridors, weapons blazing as the Crimson Tide boarded. These warriors were larger, faster, and near impossible to kill. One Valith monstrosity lunged, its bladed arm slashing toward Rourke's throat, only for him to duck and drive a magnetic grenade into its chest. The beast had just enough time to snarl before it detonated. Mara fought beside him, dual-wielding plasma pistols, moving with deadly precision. "We're losing ground," she shouted. "We don't need to hold," Rourke growled, slamming a combat knife into another Valeth's skull. "We just need to get to Xerac." On the surface, the Dominion's world was in chaos. Drop pods slammed into the Citadel's outer defenses, Iron Fang operatives emerging like demons, cutting down Valeth warriors with brutal efficiency. Then, above them, the Harbinger began its final approach, plunging toward the Citadel like a falling star. Rourke and his team barely made it to the escape shuttles as the Harbinger's AI sent one final message. "NMPCT imminent. War protocol completed." The flagship crashed into Xerac's throne room in an eruption of fire and metal. The final battle had begun. The Harbinger's impact was apocalyptic. Xerac's citadel, once the unshakable throne of Dominion rule, was now a burning ruin. Walls of black stone crumbled, massive spires toppled, and the fortress that had stood for centuries was reduced to a battlefield of fire and wreckage. Smoke choked the air, and the screams of dying Valeth warriors echoed through the devastation. Through the chaos, Rourke and the Iron Fangs emerged from the wreckage, weapons raised. The final battle was here. At the heart of the shattered citadel, High Warlord Xerac stood, unbowed. Even surrounded by flames and the corpses of his own warriors, he radiated an aura of absolute, unrelenting fury. His 6 clawed hands flexed, his armored form towering over even the largest human soldiers. His crimson eyes burned as he stepped forward, his voice a deep, guttural snarl. "You think this is victory?" Xerac growled. "You think your insignificant race can defy the Dominion?" Rourke wiped blood from his lip and tightened his grip on his rifle. "No," he said. "We're here to end it." With a roar, Xerac charged. The High Warlord was faster than anything Rourke had ever faced. One moment he was 20 feet away. The next, he was upon them, slashing through the air with enough force to split a man in two. Mara barely ducked in time, rolling to the side and unloading her plasma pistols into Xerac's chest. The energy blasts hit, but the warlord didn't even flinch. With a single swipe of his clawed gauntlet, he sent Mara flying into a broken column. She hit hard, groaning in pain. Rourke fired point-blank into Xerac's face. The High Warlord snarled, catching the barrel of the rifle in one hand and crushing it like scrap metal before swinging his other arm at Rourke's head. Rourke barely dodged, feeling the air split beside him. He grabbed a combat blade from his belt and drove it into Xerac's side. But the warlord simply laughed, wrenching the blade free and backhanding Rourke across the floor. "Pathetic," Xerac spat. "You fight like a soldier, but I am war itself." Rourke coughed, blood on his lips. "Good thing I didn't come alone." Before Xerac could react, Bishop, bleeding and battered, activated the Ghost Fleet's final command. From orbit, the remaining AI warships locked onto the Citadel's remains. The bombardment began. Precision railgun strikes ripped through the last Valeth defenders. Plasma lances melted entire towers into slag. Explosions consumed the throne room, tearing apart Xerac's forces, reducing the once mighty citadel to a ruinous crater. And yet, through the flames, Xerac still stood. Verily, the warlord fell to one knee, his armor shattered, his monstrous form charred and broken. His breath came in ragged gasps, and for the first time, there was fear in his eyes. Rourke staggered to his feet, leveling a rail pistol at Xerac's skull. "This is for Epsilon Prime." He pulled the trigger. The Dominion's reign ended in a single shot. With Xerac dead, the Valeth crumbled. Their forces, once united by their warlord's brutal command, fell into disarray. Some fought on in blind fury. Others turned and fled. The Ghost Fleet, relentless and merciless, hunted them down across the stars. Humanity had done more than survive. It had won. On the bridge of a captured Dominion dreadnought, Rourke looked out at the stars, Mara standing beside him. The war was over. The cost had been unimaginable, but humanity had proven one thing beyond doubt. The Valith had believed they were the ultimate warriors, the apex predators of the galaxy. They were wrong. Humanity was here to stay.